Hello everybody, this is Gregory with 5 Minute Catholic Apologetics and Living, where 5 minutes of your time may get you to the divine. Today we're going to talk about new changes from the Vatican on how our loved ones can be cremated. Now before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritui Sancti. Amen. Gloria Patri et Filio et Spiritui Sancto. Secutor in principio et nunc et semper et seculi seculorum. Amen. Cremation's controversial. Prior to 1963, the Catholic Church did not allow cremation at all. And then around 1963, during Vatican Council II, it was changed. And even as recently as about 7 years ago, during Pope Francis's pontificate, there was an issuance from the office of the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith that kind of clarified some things about cremation. Because most of you guys know that there's been this rise in cremation, certainly among non-religious, but even among Catholic community. And when I would say, this is my, I'm drinking a black tea with dark chocolate infused. It's certainly among Protestantism or, Christian in name only, this is very common to cremate and to keep the ashes in somebody's house, even to put them in jewelry. This is very common. So I think it was probably out of this kind of pastoral need for clarification that back in 2016, the office said about some clarifications. And the clarifications are pretty simple. You can cremate, but you cannot keep it in jewelry, and you can't keep it in a place in your home that's sacred. So if you want to cremate, it must be put in a sacred place. So either in the ground at a cemetery, or in a niche that's in a cemetery, or some place of sacredness. So the 2016 ruling kind of reinforced what has been practiced since 1963, that cremation is allowed, but that the ashes have to be put in a ciborium, so in a jar, in a sacred place. So whether it be, many of you guys have been to cemeteries where they have those little vaults, you could put them there in a cemetery, or you could bury them in the ground in a cemetery. But we can't keep them in the house, kind of like Meet the Parents, right? You guys have seen that classic movie. We can't keep them in an urn in the house, and we certainly can't put them in jewelry or anything like that, or scatter them to the wind or anything like that. So what happened was that there was a cardinal recently that expressed a dubia or wanted a clarification on cremation. And so there was a response by the head of the Congregation of the Doctrine of the Faith, who's a cardinal from Argentina, who clarified recently that there have been some changes. And so essentially the heart and crux of it hasn't changed, but what's changed is now, and I want to read this from the cardinal so I don't get this mixed up. The Vatican's doctrinal office said on Tuesday those instructions remain valid, but added that relatives, quote, may ask for a minimal part of the ashes of their relative to be stored in a place of significance for the history of the deceased person. It also said that you got to keep it in a sacred place because it prevents the departed from being forgotten or the remains being shown lack of respect. Okay, so this is going to be problematic, and I think this is going to be held on the pastoral level, and I'm going to say that the large majority of priests now, I think the large majority of pastors have been not knowing what to do because the pressure is coming from Catholics. Now you could say, well, then that these are practicing Catholics or Catholic in name only, whatever it is, that they want to cremate and keep the ashes at home or put them in jewelry and so forth. And I think that this kind of clarification is actually going to lead to more confusion, which I'm sorry to say, as much as I believe Pope Francis is the Pope, he's not always the best, or his pontificate is best, of being clear in his communication. And I think it leads to a lot of problems. And now this is going to open the door because the teaching was really clear before. You can't scatter it. You can't keep it in the house. You can cremate. It's got to be put somewhere sacred because we believe in the resurrection of the body, and we believe in that the body in its its deadness, so to speak, for lack of a better word, its mortal remains, should be treated with respect. And one of the reasons why the church was always against cremation and scattering in the wind or in the water is that it kind of has a pantheistic, atheistic, and some would say like it's a view that shows little respect to the body. Whether or not you agree with that or not doesn't really matter. So now where it says, quote, a part of it may be stored in a place of significance for the history of the deceased person. So what is this going to do? This is a Pandora's box. It really is, I think. So what's going to end up happening is letter of the law, spirit of the law. How are people going to interpret this? And I think some people are going to interpret this as, well, it says part of it can be stored in a place of significance. So I think, yeah, are there going to be people that only keep a little of it and keep it in the house in some sort of urn, but the majority of it is put in a ciborium or buried? Sure. There's going to be some people who actually follow that letter of the law. I'm worried that this is going to be totally spirit of the law. And when it says a minimal part of the ashes, that's going to be translated by certain pastors as, yeah, just keep it in the house. Just keep it in the house. And then when they say can be stored, translation, you can keep in the house, and then wink, wink, what you do with it is none of our business, because honestly, after the requiem, after the funeral mass, is the priest really going to call up a week later, what did you do with those ashes? Did you scatter them in the wind? Did you put them in the water? No. So I think this is a mistake. I think this is a pastoral mistake from the office in the Vatican that decided to do this. I really think, because it's going to open up this window to allow Catholics, and they could say in true conscience, well, not only did the Vatican, the priest says I can do it, the pastor says I can do it, now the Vatican says it, and it's going to be one of these things. Well, actually, the Vatican is saying in some sort of concession that it's okay to have a minimal part. Now, we don't know what is minimal, right? Minimal would be half of 50%, but I don't know. To me, minimal is like very little. But again, this is going to be open to translation, and this is the problem with it. Minimal part needs to be stored. Translation, people are going to get cremated, and then after the Mass, I think a lot of people, because this is so much in the zeitgeist now, with Catholics, especially secularized Catholics, modern Catholics, Catholics in name only. This is such in the zeitgeist that they're going to use this, especially if the pastor is not really strict on it, they're going to use this to just cremate and just scatter it in the wind somewhere in the water, or where they like to go fishing or whatnot. And I understand, look, Protestants who are listening to this, they don't get it, because this is very normal in the Protestant world to scatter your ashes, and you can put in jewelry or go to the desert where your uncle loved being in the desert and scatter it over there in the wind. From the Catholic perspective, and I want to add, not just Catholicism, but if you look at Islam prohibits cremation. Orthodox Jewry prohibits cremation. So it's not like it's just the Catholics. You look at some of these old historical faiths, now theologically might not agree with them, but these older historical faiths don't believe in cremation. Cremation is very common in the Eastern world, where there isn't as much of a kind of a sanctity of the body. So cremation over there is like, whatever, it's not a big deal. But in the Catholic world, it's always been, we're waiting, the body's in dormition, so to speak, or to sleep, and we're waiting for the resurrection of the body. Now, of course, through God's power, of course, if somebody's been scattered to the wind by an unscrupulous relative, it's not like it's impossible in God's power to reunite at the general judgment at the end of time to bring the body and reconnect it to the soul. Of course, God can do that, right? God can do everything. But it's more of the message that we're sending. And Christianity, not just Catholicism, but Christianity. And you can look at like mainline Lutheranism, Presbyterianism, all these in the 16th, 17th, 18th century. They were still bearing this idea of cremation is such a recent thing. And I would say that it's a recent thing because this is atheist infiltration, secular infiltration, secular values, if that's a contradiction, secular values that are seeping into not just the Catholic faith, sadly, but all the mainline Protestant faiths as well. And I think this is a mistake, in my humble opinion. I'm a lay Catholic, and Pope Francis approved this. He signed off on this. And again, this isn't necessarily on faith and morals, so it's certainly something that we can talk about and critique. I just think that this is a mistake, and I think it would have been better. And look, I get why pastors maybe would want this, because there are Catholics that will be like, my mom died, I want to cremate. And the pastor's like, sorry, we can cremate, but you have to bury him. No, I don't want to bury him. My mom really liked the Mississippi River. She wanted her ashes scattered over there. And the pastor's like, I'm sorry, we can't do that. And then people do leave the faith for reasons like this. And so I don't know if it's a good pastoral approach to concede on this and be like, all right, so the church says minimal part can be stored, wink, wink, do what you want, and it's going to keep people in the pews. I don't know if it will, and honestly, I'm kind of in the mindset of Pope Benedict when he was alive, how he's like, look, the church is going to get smaller. If there's like wayward modernist Catholics, let them leave and let's have a vibrant faith, and it's better to stand up for our centuries long traditions, including cremation, that we stick to and be like, sorry, this is what needs to be done. And actually, the church has said back in the 2016 announcement, even before that you can be denied a Catholic burial if you're flagrantly saying, no, I'm going to cremate him and scatter him in the water or in the wind. They can be denied a Catholic burial. Now, again, pastorally talking though, if you tell somebody who's openly telling you that they're going to scatter it in the wind, hey, they're not going to get a Catholic burial. I think we live in America now where a lot of these Catholic family members will be like, well, okay, I'm going to leave the faith. I don't care. Again, because there's just this massive spirit of disobedience in the world right now where they're not going to be like, you know what, Father, kind of like we talked about with fraternal correction and the idea of excommunication we talked about recently, how I think most people aren't going to be like, you know what, Father, church has wisdom. It's been around for a long time. This is the church's teaching. I will abide by the church's teaching. I might not agree with it. I might not understand it, but I'll abide by it. Now, I mean, that requires humility. And I think we've been so vitiated by secular values that most people who would hear this, like, you have to bury them in a sacred space. No, Mima wanted it in the river. Well, we don't need a funeral mass. Yeah, we're just going to go do it. We don't care. I think that is so common. So I personally think that in the long run, having this concession, which I think is going to be abused, is actually not going to lead to more people staying in the faith or a more vibrant faith. I think it's yet another concession, like we've seen how the holy days of obligation, how we used to have like 9 legitimate holy days where you'd have to go to mass during the week, or you look at ember days and fasting days and all these things, and we've watered all these things down. And has it really resulted in more people coming to the pews? Not necessarily, because that's what happens. And you've seen this in mainline Protestant denominations. When you start acquiescing to secular values, you can see, like, for example, Methodism or Anglicanism, where they have, like, for example, female ordination or homosexual clergy, openly homosexual clergy, and other values like that, embracing transgenderism and gay and same-sex union. It's not like the people are flocking to those churches. No, because once you represent nothing, there's no reason that people will be attracted to that. And I think, in my humble opinion, and I could be wrong, post in the comments, I think this concession is going to lead to a lot of problems and a lot of abuses. Guys, post in the comments. I love to hear from you. Until next time, take care. God bless and pray.